Welcome. As we had studied in the various demographic aspects, vital statistics is one of the most crucial parts of demography. Under vital statistics, what do we understand? We understand the birth, the deaths, and then we do understand the marriage and divorce. But predominantly what we understand under the concepts of vital statistics is birth and death. Now to understand this birth, we have the fertility indicators. To understand the concept of death, we focus on mortality indicators. Now when we talk about fertility, when we would start with, we would cover all these concepts in this lecture. It basically deals with the crude birth rate, the age-specific fertility rate, why this is not significantly correct and therefore there is a need for age-specific marital fertility rate. Similarly, total fertility rate to total marital fertility rate, gross reproduction and net reproduction rate, what is the replacement level when NNR equals to 1, then the birth order child women ratio, the concept of age sex adjusted birth rate. So all these are some of the important concepts that we would understand as we proceed in the lecture today. Now the basic idea to begin with is what is fertility and how is it different from fecundity. So fecundity, when I say, it's simply understanding the capability to give birth. So fecundity, it talks about the reproductive capability. Right? However, fertility talks about the birth, and that's one of the major difference. And when we talk about fertility, it's usually the live births that women have is considered as fertility. Fecundity is the reproductive capability and it is more or less physiological in nature, right? Now, fertility can be determined by numerous factors. These could be social factors, economic factors, cultural factors, health factors, and environmental factors. To put it simply, live births per woman. So if the health of the women is fine, there is no malnutrition in simple terms, then the fertility rate would be better. Similarly, if the cultural foundations are there, there could be higher fertility rates across certain cultures, certain religious backgrounds, because they do not restrict the number of births. There can be economic reasons because of which fertility could vary. A well-off society can have a higher rate of fertility as compared to the other section of the society, but there could be other thought as well where it is believed that more hands, more earning. So therefore the fertility rate is higher in certain segments. So there are numerous parameters which affect ultimately the rate of fertility. Now, when we measure fertility or when we talk about simply the demography, as we had mentioned, birth rate plus in-migration, right, minus the death rate plus e-migration would be equal to the change in the population. And this change in the population, if it is stable, then I can say the birth equals the death rate, the in-migration equals the out-migration in very simple terms. Now this fertility could be measured by various parameters. There are two major classifications that we would understand in this lecture. One is the direct-indirect method. The second is the period or the cohort method. The period or the cohort says that period simply says that duration of this during this time, okay, how many births took place. So that's considered as period. So a duration is taken into account, right, when we talk about period. When we talk about cohort indicates the group of people who have the same experience at same time. So same experience at same time, right? And that is what is called as a cohort. So it's a group of people who have similar parameters that could be taken into account together. This cohort can be classified as birth cohort and marriage cohort, right? So when we talk about the period or the duration, under this category, we have certain formulas which include the crude birth rate, the general fertility rate. We talk about the child women ratio. So all of these are under the period measure of fertility. Under the cohort measure of fertility, we have the children ever born to a woman in a reproductive age. That means within the reproductive age, which is considered 15 to 49 years, how many children are born? We call this as children ever born, CEB, and this is considered as a cohort measure because it is among the group of people who have the same experience at the same time, right? Similarly, there is other approaches which could be actually measured in the cohort, and these usually pertain to the sample surveys. Also, fertility could be measured directly or indirectly. When we say fertility could be measured directly or indirectly, direct means I am using the live birth data. So under this, the crude birth rate, general fertility rate, total fertility rate, the age-specific fertility rate, the age-specific marital fertility rate, all these parameters are taken into account. What do we take into account under indirect? When the data on that live birth is not available, right? Then what do you do is you use the data indirectly. This could be from age-sex structure. This could be because of the marital structure. This can be due to the cross-sectional classification of age and sex. And based on this, we understand indirect fertility measure under two heads. The most common is the child-women ratio. Each of these terms that we are naming it here, we'll discuss as we proceed in this lecture. So don't worry about that right now. And the next one is female mean age at marriage. Right? So what is the mean age of female at marriage? Now this is an important indicator. How? This appears to be very simple, right? So at marriage, let's say if the mean age is 15 years. Okay, so there is a higher reproductive span till 49 years, but let's say in some countries or in developed nation, this mean age shifts to 30. Then the reproductive span remains smaller from 30 to 49, which would reduce the total fertility rate, and this would have this can have a negative replacement rate. That means the population of that nation would start to decline, and when the population of the nation would start to decline, we saw the age-specific pyramids, the age-sex pyramids in the previous class. So that rather than being an increasing curve, they would start to have a tapering curve, or they would have a smaller young, a middle adult, and a wider old age population base that could be witnessed. So the female mean age at marriage is an important consideration. Now let's look on to some of the parameters that we have talked about so far. The first one that we would start with is the crude birth rate. Crude birth rate, simply put, is the total number of live births in a defined geographical area by the population of the mid-year into 1000, and this is what is called as the crude birth rate. Now, in India, the crude birth rate is declining recently. Why the crude birth rate is declining? The reasons are simple. Literacy increasing. There are family planning programs which have started. There is more awareness, more women participation in the workforce. There is opportunity cost of childbearing versus child rearing. So if you find that the child rearing is too expensive, automatically the number of child born would get reduced, right? So these are certain factors which have been reducing the crude birth rate in India. If we compare the statistics with other nations, it is about 14 in the United States, it is about 12 in China, 9 in Japan. So there are nations which do have a declining population curve, we could say, but just by the crude birth rate we cannot actually get that figure. But if we talk about India has a relatively higher birth rate than these nations. Now, why is this crude birth rate still high? On one hand, understand this carefully. On one hand, I am saying that the crude birth rate is declining. The factors associated for the same we have discussed. But still, I am saying that the crude birth rate is high. You might find these two statements controversial, but they are very important to understand. They are high because there is a